You are live, Paul.
Okay, I have 7 o'clock, so we'll call a meeting of the Dunn County Board of Supervisors in session. And we will start with the Pledge of Allegiance. And are you going to put the flag up again? All right. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of
America, and to the republic
for which
which
it
stands one
one
nation
nation,
under God,
under God,
indivisible,
with
liberty
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 and
and
justice
justice for all.
All right, we'll have the clerk call the roll.
Supervisor Johnson,
Here.
Chairman Bartlett,
Here.
Supervisor Headland,
Here.
Supervisor Score,
Here.
Supervisor Steen,
Here.
Supervisor Zons,
Here.
Supervisor Gary Bjork,
Here,
Supervisor Maves,
Here.
Supervisor Quinn, Supervisor Rogers,
Here.
Supervisor Anderson, Supervisor Anderson,
Jim is here. He may be muted.
Okay, here.
Supervisor
There he
Kinnear,
Here.
Supervisor Crumry,
Here.
Supervisor Calabrese,
Here.
Supervisor Keeter,
Here.
Supervisor Vogel,
Here.
Supervisor McCullough,
Here.
Supervisor Story,
Here.
Supervisor Vandermeulen,
Here.
Supervisor Niehoff,
Here.
Supervisor Morehouse,
Here.
Supervisor Kennedy,
Here.
Supervisor Tripp,
Here.
Supervisor Prochnow,
Here.
Supervisor Jensen,
Here.
Supervisor Larry Bjork,
Here.
Supervisor Bauer,
Here.
Supervisor Leno,
Here.
and Supervisor Hartung.
Here.
All right.
Works.
You're muted.
I'm sorry. We have a quorum. Approval of the minutes. Can I have a motion for the minutes?
I so move.
Supervisor Steen moves. Supervisor Leno seconds. Any discussion? If not, all in favor say aye.
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 Aye. Aye. Aye. Aye.
Opposed, same sign. approval of the minutes passes. Presentation of petitions, memorials, and communications. We have none. Appointments. You should have been emailed the appointment list for tonight. Menominee Library Board. Reappoint Patricia Hahn and reappoint Logan Mather. This needs board confirmation, so I need a motion on these two appointments.
I so move.
Supervisor Steen moves, Supervisor McCullough seconds. Any discussion? If not, all in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. Motion passes. The Safety Committee appoint to succeed Teresa Lyhall is Tim Lanou. All right, moving on. Report of the county manager, COVID-19 update.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. COVID-19, as you know, is an ongoing issue that we are tracking closely daily, both in terms of what's happening here in Dunn County, what's happening in our region, what's happening in the state, and indeed what's happening across the country. On Monday, the Public Health Department issued a new advisory. The highlights of that one, the changes are that now people are advised to avoid crowds of 50 people or more when outside. 15, I believe it was, KT Gallagher can correct me, 15 indoors. One of the things that's important to understand about the advisories that come out for Dunn County versus any other county or any other jurisdiction. Each public health jurisdiction not only considers the rate of spread in their particular jurisdiction, but in their region, et cetera, and considers things such as the capacity of the public health department to respond to positive cases in terms of contact tracing, the capacity of the local health system in terms of beds, availability of beds and distance. So you will find a variety of recommendations, even in adjoining counties. It is because those recommendations are tailored to the specifics of the jurisdiction that issues the advisory. I will repeat, as I have in the past, that at this point, what the Public Health Department has put out is advisory. It is not an order. There is no enforcement tied to any of those, which doesn't mean that those recommendations should not be regarded seriously by all citizens. They're issued not as a matter of being frivolous or something to do, but in fact are geared toward protecting the public health, which is one of the responsibilities that the county bears as a unit of the state government. We have a responsibility for public health, and those recommendations are intended to protect each and every one of us, those that we love, those that we meet casually. For Dunn County facilities, we are still following an operational plan that has the buildings in general closed to the general public except by appointment. We are constantly evaluating that and revisiting that. At this point, it is still in place. We will visit it again on Monday coming up as to whether or not there can be any relaxation there. So it is a gradual process. The final thing I will note on COVID-19 is, and I'm sure KT Gallagher would back me on this, the issue, the crisis has not gone away. It is still a public health emergency, still a concern. We are taking a measured and data-driven response to the public health emergency. One needs only look at the news from the state or from the nation to see that there are areas of our country that are experiencing significant surges. It is still a potential danger, especially to our most vulnerable populations. Final thing I will add is we've completed testing of all staff and residents at the neighbors. We are very fortunate that we have had no positive cases for COVID-19 in our skilled nursing facility. That is a testament to the dedicated staff that have put in these measures and followed them religiously to protect that population. So I think we owe the neighbors staff a huge debt of gratitude for the work that they have done so far. That's my report on the update on COVID-19. I'd be happy to entertain any questions on that.
Are there any questions? If not, moving on, the department annual reports for June are highway operations and UW extension. They are printed and in your handouts. They were sent to you. Moving on to purchase orders in excess of $40,000.
You were distributed along with your materials for the meeting, the purchase orders over 40,000. UW extension has a purchase in the amount of 70,180 for area 6 contracts, professional development. That is a payment that's a regular annual kind of a payment. Department of Human Services has a DHS family care payment in the amount of 396,401. That is for a full year for that family care program. That is a give back. We receive that money from the state and we return it as on an annual basis. Public Works is having a purchase order of $179,730 for the frontage road project in front of Prevea. That was for the blacktop portion of that project. Environmental Services has a $75,505 purchase order for hauling to the landfill from the transfer station. That's a monthly fee. And then Transit bought bus shelters from DuoGuard Industries in the amount of $54,387. That money came to us in the form of a grant from WisDOT and the FTA. Any questions on those?
Seeing no questions, we will move on to reports from the standing committees. From the Health and Human Services Board, Supervisor Morehouse, you had asked to have a report.
Yes, thank you, Chairman Bartlett. This is from the May 21st Health and Human Services Board. We meet again tomorrow afternoon. We approved 2 budget adjustments, which are on the agenda for today, and we had reports from each of the departments on the impact of COVID-19. DHS was in a really good position, having been able to purchase technology via grants earlier, a good position to work remotely, and have continued to deliver almost all of their services electronically. The most significant impact has been the closing of the congregate dining sites by state order and a move to either delivery or curbside pickup. That program is serving 20 to 30 additional participants each day, but hopefully those costs are being reimbursed for the additional work. The economic support program, that's food share, healthcare, child support, home heating assistance, has seen some fairly significant loosening of eligibility, verification, interview, and intake requirements for all of the programs. The reason, of course, being to provide additional benefits to those in need. For example, there are additional food benefits by EBT card for children who are also eligible for free and reduced lunch at school. Well, this has obviously provided some extremely helpful benefits to people who need them and probably has kept some childcare facilities open and functioning. These eligibility requirements are going to end at some point, and the staff and the state are trying to figure out how to figure out how to do the reviews as they are necessary and have been pushed off. Sorry. But in short, people have been well served, and there have been no major negative economic outcomes. The health department, of course, has been hugely impacted, or as KT noted to us, everything they do is now related to COVID-19, including environmental health. All of the staff, with the exception of the federally funded WIC program, are working on COVID response. All 4 of the public health nurses are working full-time on COVID response. and in fact are working extra hours, some up to 7 days a week. And 2 LTE nurses have come on to do contact tracing. They're very carefully tracking time and expenditures with their electronic record keeping system. And there will be state and federal monies coming in, some amount of which has already been received. And it is anticipated, hoped for actually, that some or all of these expenses will be reimbursed. Veteran Services finally are working on split staffing with 1 person in the office and 1 person working remotely. They are continuing to process benefit and disability claims, although are finding it somewhat difficult to work remotely with older veterans, some of whom are hearing impaired. Preliminarily, it looks like both DHS and the Health Department will be returning some funds to the levy. This all, of course, depends on the pace of the disease and the extent of federal and state monies, and I suppose the state of the world in general. That's my report. Thank you.
Thank you. Moving on to the Facilities Committee, Supervisor Maves.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have 3 topics here to bring up. First off is we have moved in on the approval of the placement of the Veterans Memorial or the Eternal Flame out at the new CSB building. So that has been placed. We are upgrading the parking lots and the roads are changing out there. So if you are driving out there, be aware of construction going on and stuff. And later on this evening, we'll be talking about a resolution on the racing that's on the agenda later on. And we're going to have our next facilities meeting on the 24th of this month at 6:30 at the CSB building. I'm requesting an in-person meeting to be held in the county boardroom with all health guidelines being followed at that time. That is my report. Thank you.
Thank you. Moving on, the Neighbors Committee, Supervisor Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As Mr. Miller noted, the neighbors have not had any residents or staff test positive for COVID-19 in either the mass testings or independent testings due to symptoms or exposure. Neighbors of Dunn County did receive relief funding. After receiving the funding, there were notifications regarding restrictions as to what the funds could be used for. This is still being vetted by the neighbors team and finance. All skilled nursing facilities in the county will receive an infection control focus survey before July 31st, 2020. This is a White House task force initiative. CMS released guidance on how to reopen nursing homes to visitors. They proposed a phased approach that is heavily focused on what is going on at the local and regional level, and partially on the nursing facility itself. The neighbors has been following the situation very closely and has been following the state of Wisconsin guidance. The state, local public health, and the neighbors believe we are still in the phase 1 of this plan. At this time, this means that they are still not allowing visitors unless it is at the end of life situation. The neighbors has not yet set a date to move into step 2, and it is very dependent on the overall situation in our region. And our next meeting is tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. via Zoom. Thank you, Mr. Chair. That's my report.
Thank you. Moving on to 9, consideration of reports, resolutions, and ordinances coming from standing committees. From the Executive Committee, A1, discussion regarding Dunn County State of Emergency Declaration. As you know, the declaration that we put in place runs out in September. There has been some discussion that maybe that is too long, so I open it up for discussion. Any of the supervisors would like to speak to this?
Chairman?
Supervisor Rogers.
I do think it's time that we get back to the board taking care of business. we can still do everything we're doing now safely the same way we're doing it now, but I'm not sure that we need to be under the same standards that we're on under the state of emergency. And we can go back to doing what we're elected to do.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else like to speak on this?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Supervisor Larry Bjork? Larry?
thank you. Hey, people have been calling about different things, and one of the things people have mentioned is that what is the status as far as active cases in Dunn County of COVID as we go forward making our decision? The 29 numbers listed as positives, but are there active cases, and how many are there?
I believe there are 2 active cases. Am I correct, KT?
No, sir.
Our health director, KT Gallagher.
Thank you. So we have had 29 people test positive. We're grateful to report that we have released all 29 from isolation here locally in Dunn County.
Thank you. Any other questions or discussion? Supervisor McCullough. There you
There we go, unmuted. So I've got 2 points in regard to this. First, state and federal relief funding to local governments is often dependent on disaster declarations or states of emergency, and COVID is very likely to fall into that same rubric. So it would be behoove us to make sure that we do not cut ourselves off from funding. Second, and far more important, is the virus itself. On March 18th, we decided a state of emergency in Dunn County. We did it because there was a pandemic in America. We didn't know what the future of the virus held for us, and we wanted to give the county the flexibility to respond quickly to adverse circumstances should they occur. None of that has changed. Do you know what has changed? On March 18th, approximately 250 Americans had died of COVID, and it was still relatively contained in a few areas. Now that number is approaching 120,000, and it is being seen all over the United States. The risk now is not less, it is much greater. States that have started major reopening are seeing large spikes in COVID infections. The virus is not gone, and it's just as infectious and deadly as it was in March. We've been very fortunate so far, but as the county takes small steps towards reopening, that could change quickly, and we will need to be able to respond quickly. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other speaking to the resolution? Our corporation counsel, Mr.
Thank you. I received questions at the executive committee meeting and since then about funding. I've had a couple of conferences with Melissa Gillenbach, who's the E911 emergency government manager. And she has informed me that as long as the federal emergency declaration is in effect, and it is, the rescission of the county's order would not have an impact on funding. If the federal declaration were discontinued, then it would end unless the state or the county took further action.
And I guess I would ask, is that further action from what we have taken already?
Yes, for example, if another emergency situation were to occur, it would be necessary to have a declaration. If there's not a federal emergency declaration in effect or a state emergency declaration in effect, then the county would have to do one if it wanted to participate or seek out reimbursement funding. That's my understanding of it.
Okay, thank you. Any other speaking to the resolution, to this discussion? Supervisor Lino.
Yes, my concern is that at the September date really will not give the county a good feel as to the impact of potentially 6,000 to 7,000 students coming back to the UW system. And I think we should really take a pause after that large influx into the Menominee area and into the county before we make that decision. Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Supervisor Tripp.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have the same question that I posed at executive committee, and that is, if we were to end our state of emergency, what in reality would change? And as kind of a lead up to that question, it's my impression that the state of emergency allows the county to be just a little more nimble in responding to changing circumstances. So I guess I've got two questions. Is that correct? Are we a little more nimble if we have a state of emergency? And then B, if we withdraw that declaration, what in essence would change?
I can address some of that if you'd like.
We will have our county manager, Mr. Miller, address, and maybe our health director, KT Gallagher. Go ahead, Mr. Miller.
Very quickly, Supervisor Tripp, the answer is we would be less able to react quickly if the situation changed, particularly if it changed badly. I think Supervisor Lenow's point about the return of students to Stout is one that we should consider seriously. It will create a concentrated population, which is a prime petri dish for the potential exposure and transmission of COVID. So the emergency declaration that we have in place simply allows us to move more quickly than we can under normal circumstances. What would change absent the emergency declaration is that more of the decisions about what we would do as they relate to official policy would have to go through the normal process, going to committee first, and depending on what policy, what it is, going from there to county board, which either means it waits for the normal schedule of meetings or we call emergency meetings with the attendant costs of doing so. So it potentially lengthens our response. And I'll defer to KT Gallagher to speak further on the need for that being able to move quickly.
KT, do you have more to add?
Sure.
Please.
Thank you. So to kind of piggyback on what the county administrator was saying is that my Health and Human Services board is the day after the county board. So even in the best of circumstances, I have 5 to 6 weeks between when I know something is an issue and when I can get it through county board. So that's particularly concerning when we're dealing with a communicable disease outbreak. Take it away from COVID. Let's talk about whooping cough. So if we had a cluster of illnesses associated with a high school, and I needed to work through some policy issues as far as isolation and quarantine, or I needed to work through some policy changes as far as closing, say, for example, a school dance. By the time I worked it through the process 5 to 6 weeks later, there is no ability for us to prevent secondary transmission related to that issue. So timeliness is significantly a concern.
Thank you. Supervisor Hedlund, you had a question or?
Yes, I do. And
Okay.
we've danced around this question of policy changes. And I guess what concerns me is that's just what concerns, I think, the rest of the board members when they talk about a state of emergency. Do we really need policy changes in order for KT Gallagher and her department to do a good job for us? I guess that's my question. What policy changes? And if there's policy changes foreseen, we should address them now and not when the whooping cough shows up.
KT, do you want to respond to that? Do you have something to respond to there?
So I appreciate that, that policy is limited to those big overarching principles like isolation and quarantine policy, which we had changed before, worked that through the process. So there are many things that are put to me as a statutory requirement, and there are things that we can do regularly in the course of our normal policies and procedures that we're already doing. I think would there need to be a change in policy and policy that would be a timeliness issue. Overall, we do have the capacity within our normal day-to-day operations, our procedures, to address in a timely way communicable disease outbreaks as part of one of our main functions in keeping people safe and healthy in Dunn County.
Mr. Chairman, if I may add, as an example for Supervisor Headland, the closing of county buildings to the general public, except by appointment and under COVID protocols, the Safe at Work plan that was adopted and implemented, which mandates the safety protocols, wearing masks for employees when they're away from their workstations, hand washing, hand sanitizer, disinfecting workspaces, et cetera. All these things would be questionable as to whether or not they could be implemented solely at a staff level, or if they would require oversight and authority granted by the facilities committee perhaps, or the county board in full. That's real world examples of some of the changes that were made that were prudent to be made on a rapid basis, and that would be substantially slowed down if we have to follow our normal review and approval process.
Any other discussion? I don't see any more. So where do we go from here? Do you want it back on county board for a resolution, or does the majority just want to leave it the way it is? I think that's where we're at.
Or would take a written resolution, which we do not have. This was agended for discussion only. My recommendation would be to, if you wish to make a motion, move that the matter be committed or referred to the executive committee to have a resolution ending the emergency order and bring it to the next county board meeting.
That would be the July 29th meeting of the county board.
Correct.
So is that what you would like to move to, Supervisor Rogers?
Sure. I don't know whether there's support for it or not, so I guess I was hoping to know if there was any support for it, or if it was going to die before that. So
we will see if we get
support for it. I won't waste your time.
We will find out right now. Is there a second to this motion? Supervisor Larry Bjork seconds.
Yes.
All right. Any discussion on this motion? Supervisor Hartung, did you want to speak? Supervisor Rogers, go ahead.
I forgot to lower my hand. I'm sorry.
All right. Supervisor Gary Bjork, did you want to speak? I thought I saw your hand come up.
Not at this time.
All right. Anybody else want to speak? Supervisor Larry Bjork.
Well, I would just like to state that, working at Walmart with hundreds of people in and out of the building, Every time I drive in there, my temperature is taken. I wear a mask when I'm near other people. There was a food wagon there today celebrating our safety achievements. And we sat at tables outside, properly spaced. And it's just sad to me that government seems to have their feet in the mud, and people that have to make a living and move forward are able to take steps to keep people safe. And I just don't know why we have to be. We are cautious. But let's take advantage of some of the things that we know that will keep us safe and implement some of that and get on with our lives a little bit. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Supervisor Steen?
Yes, I would just like to address what KT and Paul said. I think that the time frames that they used were a bit of a red herring. I think if there's an emergency, we can call a county board meeting with 24-hour notice, and we can still get the job done. Although that to me is what we would do in a normal situation. So that's my thoughts.
Thank you. Any other discussion on this motion? I see none. So are we ready to vote?
Mr. Chairman, excuse me, would you repeat the motion, please?
Okay,
I can do that if you'd like.
go ahead.
The motion is to refer the issue of the crafting of a resolution to end Dunn County's state of emergency declaration to the executive committee for consideration of action by the county board at its meeting of July 29.
Can the motion read that the executive has to bring it back to county board?
As I heard Supervisor Rogers' motion, his motion was to refer it to executive for the purpose of drafting a resolution to end it. I suppose if the executive committee fails to come up with a majority to do so, then there's nothing to forward.
Any questions? Supervisor? Oh, I thought I saw a hand go up, but I don't think so. Any other questions? If not, understanding the motion that this would send a motion to asking executive to craft the motion, craft the resolution to consider bringing back to county board at the next county board meeting. So
Yes. No,
All
sorry.
okay, so everybody in favor of sending this to executive, say aye.
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 Nays, same sign.
No.
Aye.
Aye.
I think we better do a roll call. I'll have the clerk call the roll.
Supervisor Kinnear,
No.
Supervisor Crumry,
Aye.
was that aye?
Yeah.
Supervisor Keeter,
No.
Supervisor Leno,
No.
Supervisor Maves,
Aye.
Supervisor McCullough,
No.
Supervisor Morehouse,
No.
Supervisor Niehoff,
Aye.
Supervisor Prochnow,
Yes.
Supervisor Quinn,
Yes.
Supervisor Rogers,
Aye.
Supervisor Score,
No.
Supervisor Steen,
Aye.
Supervisor Story, Supervisor Story, Supervisor Tripp,
No.
Supervisor Vandermeulen,
No.
Supervisor Vogel,
No.
Supervisor Zons,
No.
Supervisor Anderson,
No.
Supervisor Bauer, Supervisor Bauer,
Supervisor Bauer, you're muted.
Supervisor Bauer,
Yes. Can you hear me?
yes. Supervisor Gary Bjork,
Yes.
Supervisor Larry Bjork,
Yes.
Supervisor Calabrese,
No.
Supervisor Hartung, Supervisor Hartung,
Yes.
Supervisor Headland,
Yes.
Supervisor Jensen,
Yes.
Supervisor Johnson,
Yes.
Supervisor Kennedy,
No.
Chairman Bartlett,
No.
Supervisor Story, Supervisor Story,
She must have left.
No. Did you hear me that time?
yes.
Thank you.
So what is it?
15I.
Okay, yeah, the motion passes to move it on to executive.
I have 15. 15, yes.
It's a real close count, so just give us a second. I think we have to go with the clerk, don't we? Yep. All right, we move it on to executive. Thank you. Good discussion. Moving on, A2, resolution authorizing a referendum on solid waste and recycling funding. We are talking about asking to bring this back in July because we don't have, we weren't able to come up with any numbers at this time for this resolution for the referendum. Is that correct, Mr. Lang? Did you want to speak to this?
Yes, I can a little bit. There was a recent change in the law that loosened up some of the technical requirements for a budget levy resolution like this one. It's still very early in the cycle of getting information from the Department of Revenue about the valuation of property in the county, mill rates, new construction figures, and the percentage of any regular allowable increase that might occur. And so we don't have any figures in there. I'm recommending that the chair ask for a vote or ask for a motion to postpone this resolution to the July 29 meeting. It will require a second and a majority vote in order to allow for further vetting of the resolution, more legal research, and to put together some estimates of the levy percent increases and other dollar figures that we would expect to see in the ballot question. The law does allow us to use best available information. Unfortunately, right now, we don't have any.
We still do have time if we bring this to the July board meeting.
Correct.
There still is time to get it on the fall referendum. Supervisor Bjork, Gary Bjork.
That was my question also, if that would be time sensitive, but as long as we can still make it by the July meeting, that'd be okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Do you want to make that motion?
I'll make that motion that we'll postpone the referendum vote until the July 29th meeting, I believe.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Is there a second to that?
I will second.
Supervisor
Bauer.
Bauer seconds. All right. Speaking to the motion. Any speaking? Any discussion? Questions? If not, Supervisor Vandermill.
I don't know if it's directly related to the motion, but I wondered if we will need any kind of budget for promoting the vote, because usually if people are going to pay more money, they'd like to have good reasons to do so. And I'm wondering if it'll cost the county anything to get out information and to ask people to vote for it.
I can answer, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Miller.
Yes, it will cost money to promote the referendum. It'll also cost money to put the referendum question on the ballot. We have monies, as I understand, in the solid waste and recycling budget, especially given that last month we did a budget adjustment for that program. The monies for the referendum question will have to come out of another fund. We'll work out what it costs and how it will be funded.
Any other questions? So, all in favor of putting this off to the July 29th meeting, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye. Aye. Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carried. We'll bring that back on next month's meeting.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Supervisor Steen.
Yeah, I lost my Zoom when Julie was doing the counting on the voting. What kind of tally did you get, Julie?
It was 14-15 and the motion passed.
My count was 15-14 no.
We have to go with the clerk's count.
Okay, thank you.
Moving on to A3, resolution authorizing a referendum on fair redistricting. So I need a motion. Supervisor Tripp moves and Supervisor Kennedy, I think, second. Speaking to the resolution.
Mr. Chair.
Supervisor Tripp.
Thank you. This is an issue whose time has come. I'm reading this, by the way, because I know that we're pressed for time and sometimes I ramble. The time has come. Every 10 years after the census results are finalized, every state's required to set boundaries for congressional district. Each state determines how the boundaries will be drawn. It's the responsibility of the state legislature to draw or to have drawn the maps of congressional districts. And in many states like Wisconsin, this gives the political party in power the ability to draw maps that favor their interests. The process is incredibly partisan. The majority party draws the maps and the minority party invariably challenges that in court. 10 years ago, when this happened last, the taxpayers of Wisconsin paid $1.9 million for the legislature to defend their congressional redistricting in court. It doesn't have to be this way. There are at least 4 methods that are currently in use by other states whereby congressional district maps are drawn by a nonpartisan entity using basic principles of fairness rather than political interest. If you've watched the news lately, you've seen that a conservative group in Wisconsin has already asked the Supreme Court to hear any case where the maps are challenged. The reason for that is that the Supreme Court is seen as conservative and the Republican-controlled legislature is likely to win there. This move is being opposed by a group of Democratic legislators who would prefer to see the inevitable challenge heard in a federal district court. They're considered liberal and they would more likely rule in favor of the Democratic minority. I don't think any of these people, these partisan interests, should be drawing our maps. 50 counties, including Dunn County, have already passed resolutions in favor of a fair map process. 23 counties have already put the question on the ballot as a non-binding referendum, such as we propose to do. The results of those referendums has been overwhelmingly in favor of nonpartisan mapping. When individuals are polled on the issues, more than 75% of all people polled favor nonpartisan mapping, including 63% of all Republicans, and they have the most to gain by keeping the political process. I want you to think about that a minute. The people with the most to gain from keeping the current system favor changing it because they know that it's inherently unfair as it is. This is a great time to do this with this question on the November ballot. It's going to be a simple matter. You can ask any candidate for state office how they stand on this issue, and then you can weigh their response when you vote. So I urge you to vote yes on the resolution. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Any other speaking? Supervisor Kennedy.
I strongly urge that we get this question on the ballot. The gerrymandering in this state is outrageous. Some people you can't get anywhere without it. So I think we really need to get a referendum on the fair maps. It's been passed all over the state. It's gone to many other county boards and they're all supporting it. And I suggest we support it. As a matter of fact, I urge you to support it. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other speaking? Supervisor Rogers, do you have your hand up?
Yes, I also support this. Anytime we can take partisanship out of something like this, I think is great.
Thank you. Anybody else that I'm not seeing? I'm not seeing any. If not, all in favor of this, say aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. Motion passes, resolution passes. Okay. 9-4, resolution in support of the Hmong community. Supervisor Tripp moves. Supervisor Steen seconds. Speaking to the resolution, Supervisor Tripp.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, I've written this out because it can get just a little complicated. The situation is this: the Trump administration, roughly since the first part of the year, has engaged in talks with the government of Laos regarding the repatriation of a little more than 4,500 Hmong refugees who are living in the United States. And most of you know that the Hmong are an ethnic group of mountain people. They live in southern China, Laos, Vietnam, and importantly, they fought on the side of the Americans during the Vietnam War. After the war, many of the fighters and their families were brought to the United States because they were our allies, and if left behind, they faced near certain death from the winning side. The announcement that there is now an effort to send about 4,500 of them back to Laos, I shouldn't say back to Laos because some of them left as mere children. But anyway, it's caused a great deal of fear and uncertainty in among population because 40 years after they're leaving, the deportation means significant danger for those who are deported and disruption to their families and communities. Now, I want to be clear about this because the targeted population for deportation are among people who have not acquired U.S. citizenships and do have felony convictions. Now, on the face of it, that seems to be maybe appropriate. Let's deport them. However, as in many cases like this, there are extenuating circumstances, all kinds of factors other than those that are obvious that should be considered. And what I'd like to do is read just real briefly from an article that showed up in the Star Tribune on February 19th. And I read this because it explains fairly well what the situation is. And I'm excerpting here, but concern is very high that many of those affected had been low-income youth who pleaded guilty to crimes, sometimes as long as 30 and 40 years ago, who didn't realize at the time how it would affect their immigration status. Southeast Asians who came here as refugees, many of them were settled in the poorest parts of cities, all had some kind of war trauma. Nearly all of them had been transit through Thailand refugee camps, and they might have taken plea deals to relatively minor or sometimes major crimes when they were not in a position to afford an attorney that would advise them any better. And it's small chance that many of them understood much about immigration laws or how their record might impact their stay in America. They cite the case of a St. Paul man who said he arrived as a child during the early 1980s. He was in a large refugee family, grew up poor, dropped out of high school, became homeless, robbed convenience stores with a group of friends to survive, and was caught, apprehended, put on trial, convicted of a felony, and went to jail. Well, the man's been out of jail since the late 80s. He now has a family. He got his GED. He's taken college credits. He's got a clean record. And to now deport him for something that happened 30 years ago seems a little bit like maybe it's excessive. He says, I'm not proud of my record, but since then I've contributed, I've advanced in life, pursued a career, and had a family. He doesn't speak Laotian. He doesn't have any relatives left in the country. He doesn't have any members of the country, but yet he would be deported. Now, one of the things about the resolution that I want you to take particular note of is in the first, be it resolved, and in the last line of that, this proposal, we are opposed to any proposal that would result in the indiscriminate deportation of members of the Hmong community. There may still be a legitimate effort to deport certain individuals, but the indiscriminate approach that the current administration is taking is probably not appropriate. In conclusion, I just want to say that this is a time of real stress and strife in America. We're grappling with our attitudes about race, inclusion, fairness, all those things. And here in Dunn County right now, we have an opportunity to make a statement that we support the virtues of fairness, opportunity, inclusion. I hope you agree, and I hope you vote in favor of the resolution. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Any other speaking to the resolution? Questions? Supervisor Rogers, you have your hand up.
Yes.
Thank you.
I support the meaning of the resolution, and but I don't like the manner that it was written. We work very hard on the county board, and I believe that's because we all bring a diverse viewpoint to the table. So I'd like us to keep it more nonpartisan, and I urge you not to change that narrative. When the resolution attacks one party, the party that we're trying to get to reevaluate and support the resolution, I think we're kind of shooting ourselves in the foot. We should be more soft with that, maybe, to try to get those people to open their mind to what we're trying to do and to think more reasonably about what they're looking to do instead of being partisan. But I do support the resolution with that indiscriminate clause in there.
Thank you. Any other speaking to the
Mr.
resolution?
Chair, if I may respond just
Supervisor,
briefly.
Supervisor Tripp.
I appreciate the comments of Supervisor Rogers. And originally, the resolution did not have the word indiscriminate. And as I read it, I thought that was a more partisan approach because it blanket opposed any deportation. I understand your point and it's well taken, and just wanted to make that clarification on why we put the word indiscriminate in. Thank you.
Any other speaking or questions? Supervisor Kinnear.
Supervisor Kinnear. I have a question for Supervisor Rogers. Were you referring to indiscriminate, or were you referring to the whereas a recent proposal by the current presidential administration?
My point was when they put in there the line about the current presidential administration, I believe that will alienate a percentage of the people reading it before they open their mind to see what it says, because it becomes a partisan issue. So that's what I was referring to more than anything. And what Mr. Tripp said was he added that at the executive committee, and I appreciate that because it was very appropriate.
Thank you, Mr. Tripp. How do you feel about that line, the current presidential administration versus a recent proposal all by itself?
It's accurate, but I suggest that perhaps the resolution would not lose any meaning if it were judiciously deleted.
And what would you suggest we delete?
I don't suggest we delete anything.
Okay.
I've never seen so much agreement on a disagreement.
All right. So does somebody want to make an amendment to this, or are we okay to vote on it as is? I am seeing no amendments. Any other discussion? Seeing none. Supervisor Rogers, did you raise your arm or were you just stretching?
It's just stretching.
No. All right. All in favor then of this, say aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. Okay. The resolution passes. Uh, 9A5, resolution approving the FY 2020 budget adjustment for Health and Human Services Department. This is, you've got it in your packet. It's pretty cut and dried. There's background information on the back of it. Is there any questions on this resolution?
Need a motion first.
Need a
I
motion.
need a motion.
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Supervisor Morehouse moves, Supervisor McCullough seconds. Any discussion? If not, Supervisor Morehouse, did you want to have something to say or?
No, thank you.
Okay,
I-
all right. All right. Seeing none, all in favor. Oh, this has got to be a roll call vote. The clerk will take the roll.
Supervisor Kennedy,
Yes.
He's muted.
Supervisor Kinnear,
Julie, unmute.
Yes.
Supervisor Crumry,
Yes.
Supervisor Keeter,
Yes.
Supervisor Lino,
Yes.
Supervisor Maves,
Yes.
Supervisor McCullough,
Yes.
Supervisor Morehouse,
Yes.
Supervisor Niehoff,
Yes.
Supervisor Prochnow,
Yes.
Supervisor Quinn,
Yes.
Supervisor Rogers,
Yes.
Supervisor Score,
Yes.
Supervisor Steen,
Yes.
Supervisor Story,
Yes.
Supervisor Tripp,
Yes.
Supervisor Vandermeulen,
Yes.
Supervisor Vogel,
Yes.
Supervisor Zons,
Yes.
Supervisor Anderson,
Yes.
Supervisor Bauer,
Yes.
Supervisor Gary Bjork,
Yes.
Supervisor Larry Bjork,
Yes.
Supervisor Calabrese,
Yes.
Supervisor Hartung,
Yes.
Supervisor Headland,
Yes.
Supervisor Jensen,
Yes.
Supervisor Johnson,
Yes.
Chairman Bartlett.
Yes. Resolution passes. All right, 9B, Planning Resource Development Committee, authorizing an application for the Knowles Nelson Stewardship Local Assistance Grant from the Department of Natural Resources. Need a motion for this? Supervisor Quinn moves.
Chair, second.
Supervisor Vogel seconds. Speaking to the resolution, Supervisor Quinn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just very briefly, I think the resolution, the summary of the resolution sort of speaks for itself, but this is just an opportunity for us to partner, as we often do, with a local organization to secure some funding from the State Stewardship Fund that would not be available to them in exchange for their providing the matching funds and taking on the job of doing the construction work on the staircase to the Devil's Punch Bowl, which is a really wonderful and unique local natural area that's open to the public and a worthy project. So hope you support it.
Any other speaking or questions? Supervisor Larry Bjork.
My only question is that in reading it, that the cost could be $60,000 with Dunn County possibly having to pay $30,000. And I don't know, we've asked the taxpayers to pay more to register their vehicles, and we're looking to spend a fair amount more money on our recycling program. And I guess I have some questions also as far as if you build a staircase, is who's responsible for the liabilities of the staircase, for maintaining the staircase? And if it is a natural site, how is the staircase enhanced a natural site? So I have some questions about it, only because I think that we've asked people to spend money on things that have to be done. And I don't see this as something that has to be done other than to receive matching funds. Thank you.
Yeah, I can answer the first part of your question. After the $30,000 where it says require a $30,000 cash match will be provided by Landmark Conservancy. So that's where that match is coming from. Supervisor Quinn, I know you discussed some maintenance at your committee? Do you have answer for any of the other questions?
Yes, the site is owned by Landmark Conservancy. They are a well-established local land trust that has partnered with the county on a number of projects. They maintain the site. They will arrange for the construction of the staircase. There has been a staircase over the years going down into that site. This will improve that greatly and increase the ability of access. So yeah, really there won't be any maintenance responsibility by the county. We have a reliable partner that's willing to take on that task and take on the construction management. It's really just a positive for the county as far as I can see.
Any other questions? See none. All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. Motion carried. 9C, Facilities Committee, resolution authorizing a shortened 2020 racing season at the Dunn County Recreation Park. I need a motion for this.
Mr. Chair, I so move.
Supervisor Maves moves and Supervisor Larry Bjork seconds. Speaking to the resolution, Supervisor Maves will start.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Facilities Committee was asked by the Red Cedar Racing Association to open up the track to allow the race season to be a shortened season, but to at least allow it to happen. As private tracks around the Menominee area and throughout the state of Wisconsin and Minnesota opened up, they was wondering why we were not opening up. So the Facilities Committee reached out to Douglas County up in the city of Superior and over at Shawano County, because they are counties that also have racetracks that they own and they are operating. And so we reached out to those counties to see what kind of guidelines, requirements, protocol they had to allow their racing. And then we did receive that back from them. At the July 9th meeting, the facilities discussed the proposals and guideline recommendations and voted on option number 4. So all the board members should have what option number 4 was. I actually had 5 options available on the documents that were sent to you. And we voted on going with option number 4 to forward it on to the executive committee. When it was on the agenda at the executive committee, the proposals were discussed. It was asked if the Red Cedar Racing Association would be open to having a checklist type of document to help remind them of what the guidelines were and to actually check it off to see that they were being followed. And it was also asked if they would be open to have a registration of all people that entered the grandstand, so we would have their names and addresses. So as far as if we had to find out who was all there, we would all have a record of that. So I contacted the president, Mark Thomas, and he said they would be open to that. And then they sent us a checklist form and a registration form, which all of you should have gotten sent to you. So you were able to preview that for your consideration. And so all through this whole process, it's been a very open and transparent communications between the Facilities Committee and the Racing Association. And I'm sure, I know that the leadership of the Racing Association knows what's on the line here as far as following their recommendations, their rules. All eyes are going to be watching them. They're fully aware of all that. And this is another thing. They're a local a group, and they buy local, everything, so they're helping the local economy. And so that's what's on the agenda here this evening. And I do have one question, Mr. Chair. The fact that the checklist part of it was not on the original proposal that went to the executive committee, I would like to offer an amendment to the resolution that would include this checklist if possible.
Okay.
So the amendment would read, the requirements attached to the resolution to include a requirement that the Racing Association would use a checklist form approved by the Public Works Director to document that operational requirements have been met, certified by a signature of the officer of the board, and provided to the facilities office within 2 business days following the conclusions of any race.
Okay, is there a second to that amendment?
Chairman, I'll second.
Supervisor Rogers seconds it. All right, speaking to the amendment.
Here again, Mr. Chair, it's the fact that, and it was just a proper protocol that be attached to the resolution. So tonight we will be voting on everything that came forward and the additions that was added on the executive committee.
Right. I believe we have to vote on the amendment first, get that out of the way. So is there any other speaking towards the amendment? Supervisor Kinnear. Supervisor Kinnear.
Yes, I was wondering if you could read that again, Supervisor Maves.
Certainly. So the amendment would be that the requirements attached to the resolution to include a requirement that the Racing Association use a checklist form approved by the Public Works Director to document that the operational requirements have been met, certified by signature of an officer of the Racing Association, and provided to the facilities office within 2 business days following the conclusion of any race.
Thank you. What does operational requirements mean? Does that include distancing, face masks?
Yes, that was one of the attachments that you should have received as far as what their guidelines were going to be as far as the distancing and how they're going to serve food and the lines and that is what is the definition of that.
The exhibit is attached to the draft resolution.
Yes, I understand that part. Some of the things are voluntary, and I was just wondering what that meant. And I think he explained it. Thank you, Mr. Maves.
You're welcome.
Any other questions to the amendment or speaking to the amendment? Supervisor Morehouse.
Yeah, Mr. Maves, does the amendment, you specifically mentioned the checklist. Does the checklist also include the registration or contact information of people entering the grandstand? That was
yes. You should have gotten forwarded that list or that.
Right, but you didn't specifically mention it in the amendment, so I just wanted to make sure it was there.
Oh, okay. Well, yes, it was the intent for that. That would also be included because that would be considered part of the operational requirements.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you.
Okay, and Supervisor, I saw somebody waving. Lino?
Yes.
Supervisor Lino, did you? Go ahead. Tim, did you have a question?
No, wasn't
Okay.
me.
All right. Sorry. Who?
No, I did not. That's all right.
Any other questions? All right, voting on the amendment. All in favor of the amendment only. All in favor of the amendment, say aye.
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 Aye. Aye.
Nay, same sign. All right, the amendment passes. Now, back to the original resolution. Speaking to the original resolution. Any more speaking to the original resolution? Supervisor Vandermillion.
I think we know by now that COVID is primarily transmitted through the air. So it strikes me that the most dangerous part of the whole operation here would be the restrooms. So I wonder if anybody knows about how often the air is changed in the restrooms, whether there's a good exhaust fan, for instance. I think the plan mentioned keeping doors open, but unless a lot of air moves through there, that's a place where the disease could be transmitted.
Okay, can anyone answer that question? All right, I don't see the...
Chairman?
Yes. Who is that? Supervisor Larry Bjork.
I really can't speak to the air into the restrooms, and I don't really know what is used as far as the porta potties, but I know the guy that runs porta potties pretty well. And, you know, it just seems like this is kind of a good citizenship thing that's going on. And if people need porta potties cleaned regularly after every use, I'm sure the Racing Association knows who to ask. And if that's something that needs to be done, have it be done.
All right. Any other speaking?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Supervisor Story.
looking at that checklist, there's one area that I didn't see addressed, and that was how it was going to be enforced. Can anybody answer how enforcement would happen with this? I mean, I see that it talks about people will be there watching and looking, and they'll be doing photography and all of that kind of thing, but still, I'm still wondering how they will enforce this.
All right. Supervisor Maves can answer that one.
Yes, it's in speaking with President Mark Thomas and the board, it was my understanding that the board members will be out and about watching and enforcing as far as social gathering to the best of their abilities. There will not be armed guards or anything per se, but there will be signs up and they will be announcing and telling the people about it. And here again, it gets back to, I truly believe the Racing Association and the people attending realize the importance of following the rules. But so in answer to the question, it was my understanding that the board would be out and about explaining and telling the people to follow the rules and social distancing.
Mr.
All
Chairman?
right.
Mr.
Yes,
Chairman?
Supervisor Story.
Following up on that, as much as I would love to go to the races and as much as I believe they're going to do everything that they could do to make them safe, I don't see how that would be possible. And I don't see how they could possibly enforce it. I mean, if they find that there's been somebody that is drunk and drinking and are they going to physically remove him? Are they going to call the Dunn County Sheriff's Department? What are they going to do to prevent that from happening? In addition to that, we've got our experts in our area that are telling us how we should handle this crisis or this pandemic. And that right now has to do with having small gatherings of no more than a certain number of people. This is totally contrary to that. And as leadership in this county, I don't want to be responsible for approving something that could possibly mean a spike in the COVID virus. And as we know, even though we're doing pretty well in our county, it is being spiked around the counties in our area, which would, I think, include New Richmond, where they recently had that race that they talked about in some of the emails that I read. So my vote would have to be no, as much as I would love to go to these races.
Okay, Supervisor Quinn. Yes, thank you. And thank you for getting the checklist that we talked about at executive committee. I think that's a good first step. I do have a question though, and that's, and we talked about a bit about this in executive committee, but in the event that there was a problem, let's say that there was a failure to monitor, or that there was some kind of a unexpected, but perhaps not, you know, rare or a totally unexpected reason to be concerned about the continued operation. I don't see any provision in the agreement to, although we talked about it at executive, I don't see any process of how we would say, okay, there's a problem, we need to cut back, or we need to maybe discontinue. Maybe some explanation of that would be helpful. Supervisor Maves, would you rather have somebody else speak on that?
Well, I can basically we do have in the racing agreement that the county does have the right to shut it down at their discretion because of health issues, and if if there was proof that they were not following their guidelines, or they were, you know, in essence breaking the rules, I'm sure that there'd be a proposal back to the facilities committee to shut it down based upon, you know, said criteria, and we'd probably have no choice but to shut it down. I do understand Supervisor Quinn's question. There was not a verbatim as to the course of action taking of violations, which is probably my error. I should have had something in there, or the facilities board should have discussed what the actions would have been, but I'll take the blame for that one. But I guess the course of action would be that the complaint would come back to the facilities committee. We would, you know, weigh the evidence and move forward from there.
I don't see any other hands, and I would like to.
Mr. Chairman.
I have a question.
All right. I wasn't gonna shut the discussion down. I was thinking it might be time to hear from our health director, KT Gallagher, because she may be able to add something to, if there was a outbreak, that she could change her recommendation to an order, as they have in Eau Claire County. I was going to ask to hear from her. So is that all right with 3 or 4 hands that came up, that you would wait until after KT talks and she may answer some questions?
Yes.
Okay. At this time, I would ask our health director, KT Gallagher, to speak on this, please.
Thank you, Supervisor Bartlett. So I've been very clear with my recommendations that they are recommendations, they are not orders at this point, but based on the public health best practice, my recommendation is that we do limit the size of gatherings, especially on county-owned property, to 25 indoors and 50 outdoors. That's regardless of the reason that people are getting together, but especially true for social gatherings. So when we have a social gathering of 300 to 600 people, 300 people being the pit crews and the drivers, and an additional 600 people being half of the grandstand, that creates an environment where we can have really clear spreading. Somebody could call that a super spreading event, where not only is an airborne transmission concern present, like in the bathroom, but at close contact. So people being within 6 feet of each other for more than 15 minutes. Additionally, through physical contact. So that has to do with touching, hugging, handshaking, that kind of thing. And we're seeing transmission that way. And so the reason I make the recommendation to not open county property to large gatherings over 50 people out of doors is based on public health best practice. It's based on the recommendations that I have put forward from the very get-go, that we have good physical and social distancing, that we have good hand hygiene and respiratory hygiene, that we have good cleaning and disinfecting of high-touch surfaces. And that's based, those recommendations are based on 4 overarching principles. Those 4 overarching principles is that there is no vaccine, there's no cure, there's no treatment for COVID-19. That people can spread COVID without knowing they have it. And we've seen that in our Dunn County cases. We've seen pre-symptomatic spread. One of our cases was exposed by a family member that did not know that they were COVID positive. They didn't have symptoms until a couple days later. Another overarching principle that COVID can be really mild to very serious. And so we've seen that in our Dunn County cases as well. So we've had asymptomatic folks, people that got tested because they were a close contact to a known positive. They had no symptoms. They were positive. We've also had Dunn County cases that have spent nearly a month in the hospital, including 2 weeks on a ventilator. Very, very serious. And then finally, the other overarching issue is that so much is changing so very fast. The science is changing. The rates of infection are changing. Trumpeau County has had a doubling to 80 cases in 2 weeks. Things change very, very quickly. And those overarching principles are incredibly important. So my recommendations are data informed. I spend a lot of time looking at data. I'm looking at the stories and the numbers. So the qualitative and the quantitative data, and they help inform my recommendations. I'm looking at the disease burden and trends. That's the epidemiology of what's going on with COVID in our community. I've taken several classes in epidemiology. I'm looking at hospital capacity. Do we have ICU beds? Do we have ventilators here available to us here in Dunn County, as well as in the region? Because we don't have a lot of capacity here in Menominee, in Dunn County. So we really rely on our region for places to put our folks that are being impacted by COVID-19, as well as other trauma-based needs for ICU beds. And then the data around the numbers around public health capacity. I've talked to you guys about contact tracing. It's so incredibly important that we identify cases and then we work very, very quickly to identify their contacts so that we can prevent secondary spread. But I'm also listening to the stories. I know you guys are getting calls, so are we. So I'm looking at the stories that I'm hearing from the WIAA about student athletes and mental health. I know that there's an incredible impact to mental health when we're not able to do the things that we know work to fill our bucket to help our mental health. I'm hearing from schools about how are they going to keep their staff that have diabetes, that are 60 or better, their bus drivers, their teachers safe, because kids oftentimes don't have symptoms, but it can be really impactful, again, that range in symptoms in our folks that are at high risk. I hear the story from businesses. We've talked to businesses in many different sectors, be it the chamber, be it the LEPC, about their concerns. I know that we have businesses that are not able to continue because of COVID. That weighs heavily on me and my heart and my decision-making process. Can we do something safely in order to maintain the economic health of our community? I'm also hearing from folks that are working that don't have access to cleaners. They've been asked by their employer to bring in disinfectant and sanitizer because their employer can't source it. And then finally, I'm hearing from our long-term care facilities, and I know you are too. I'm hearing that there is a real impact to social isolation and dignity. That's concerning. But I also know that 70% of our deaths in Wisconsin have been 70 years or older. Recognizing that if you're 80 or older, you've got a 20% chance of dying if you get COVID-19. Those stories weigh heavy and the data weighs heavy. So in this situation, we have no great options. We have a series of less crummy options. And so the recommendations that I make need to recognize the whole community and the whole person and hold those things in concert so that we're looking at the whole picture, not just part of the picture. The recommendations need to be timely, as I shared with my whooping cough example. Because things change so fast, we need to be able to make a recommendation very quickly, and it needs to be data informed. I review the data daily. I have daily conversations with the state DHS and my regional health officer partners. And I take into consideration the change that we're seeing regionally and locally. I've talked about how my recommendations aren't orders. And so we're reaching out and having other people reach out to us. You guys may or may not know that I do a video every week. We do a lot of press releases, a lot of health alerts. We're engaging with our faith leaders. We're engaging with our business community in conversation about why I think it's not safe to have large gatherings, 50 out of doors, 25 indoors. But I'm also working with them on harm reduction strategies. So if they tell me we have to do this, I'm going to work with them to do it safer. And then, finally, I know that nobody in this room wants to get sick. And by room, I mean Zoom room, wants to get sick with COVID, and nobody wants to spread that. I absolutely understand that. You've hired me to give you my best perspective based on my 18 years in local public health, based on my education, and based on my understanding of epidemiology and local public health to make recommendations for you guys. Please know that if you choose to not take those recommendations, I will work like heck to put in place strong harm reduction strategies. But if you choose to not take my recommendations, I really want you to find the research, the data, the stories that are valid to you and make a consistent decision. We love the races. Is it safe? We need to be able to apply that consistently using data, using timely changes in the data and the situation so that we can keep our whole community safe, not just the people that go to an event, but their coworkers and their families, our whole community. Thank you for your time today.
Okay, thank you. Now moving on, we had a number of hands. Supervisor Steen, you have your hand up.
Yes, KT, if you could answer this, how many ventilators are available for us in Dunn County and how many beds are available?
So if you're talking about regional, I'll pull up the slide just really quickly so I can give you an actual number. So total in the Western region, and this is a several county region, there are total beds, 960 total beds. There are 327 ICU beds, but I realize that we're probably not going to drive to Douglas County if we need an ICU. In Menominee, we don't have a traditional ICU room. We have ventilators and we have negative pressure rooms, but ICU rooms are different. And so many of our folks that have had to be hospitalized have had to go to outside areas, be it
I
Rochester,
see that.
the Twin City Metro, or Eau Claire.
Thank you.
Okay, Supervisor Vogel, you have your hand up.
Yes, I have a couple questions. Are we being inconsistent by canceling the county fair, but opening the races, which are two large outdoor events? I think they're slightly different, but, and also, is it being inconsistent not to listen to the advice of the public, health department? And my last question was, is there any liability to the county if someone happens to get COVID and die and the family decides that someone is responsible? And is that because it's a county facility? Do we have any liability in that situation? Thank you.
All right. We could ask our corporation counsel to answer the first or the second one on the liability. I think the first one, yes, there is some inconsistency that we are not being consistent, but yet they are different. The fair had to make a decision a month or two ago because of contracts. So a little bit different. Corporation Counsel, do you want to answer the second one, liability?
Yes, I was trying to get my notes over to one side. I've looked into various areas of law, and of course, the classic attorney answer is, it depends. I won't say it depends, but I will say that I can't give a 100% guarantee of this. But I am very, very confident that liability, the risk of liability is extremely low. First of all, racing is an inherently dangerous activity. Attending races is an inherently dangerous activity. Looking under tort law, negligence, with recreational use statutes, various governmental immunities, and the waivers that customers or attendees generally agree to with the purchase of a ticket. I don't see it. I see a very, very, very low risk of liability. And finally, the Racing Association is contractually obligated to indemnify the county for losses that might be found to be related to racing activity. And again, it's not 100% sure, but I evaluate the risk as very, very low. That's, I guess, the best I can do right now, because you never know what circumstances are going to lead to this. The contact tracing might, result in the race being the primary focus. It might result in pre-race activities or post-race activities. There are just so many variables that it comes to bear on why the risk of liability is low, but also the difficulty in addressing it, other than to say, I think it's really low, because you just don't know what facts will present in any circumstance.
Thank you. Supervisor Morehouse, you had your hand up.
I did. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I had lots of wonderful data to share with you, but KT has done an excellent job, and I won't repeat. I am opposed to this, the checklist and the other restrictions notwithstanding. I think that we as county supervisors, as elected officials, have a responsibility to ensure and protect the public health and safety. I think the expert advice from KT, from the National Institutes of Health, from the Centers for Disease Control, on and on and on, the Department of Health Services, and our own expert guidance say this is not a wise decision. If we reopen the racetrack, we run the risk of a significant spread of COVID-19 in the county. We risk a spread within the county as people carry the virus home, and we risk a spread out of the county as people carry the virus out of the county. These are not just Dunn County residents attending the races. So I think it sends a very bad message if we choose to ignore the advice of the public health community, of the accumulated expertise. And I think it sends a very bad message for us to essentially repudiate the advice of our own public health director. So I am opposed, and I will be voting no. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Supervisor Jensen, you had your hand up before.
Yes. Other tracks have opened up, and I was wondering what guidelines they have had, and if they have been racing, if that's been pretty successful with their guidelines. And that would be my question.
I can answer a little bit. The one in Douglas County and Superior has opened up. They have not seen a spike or anything from that. I talked with them within the last week. Their chair, one of the reasons that they were open to opening when they did was they have 300 beds available to them in Duluth, which is a little bit different than our situation. A little bit bigger department to contact tracing. And but yeah, they have opened up. Supervisor Maves, do you have anything to add on that?
No, nothing other than what the guidelines were for up there and at Shawano County. I do not know what the guidelines are at the private held tracks, and I do not know of any outbreaks or as far as number increases from the open. So I do not have anything to add.
Okay. The guidelines here mirror what is being used at the Douglas County track, at least.
Okay, thank you.
I had lots of hands up before. Supervisor Cromley.
This question is for KT. What's the current CDC mortality rate for COVID stated at versus the CDC current mortality rate for the standard regular seasonal flu?
Sure. So thank you for the question. In Wisconsin right now, we have a case fatality rate of 3%, and recognizing that that is likely due to not really capturing all of our cases. So there has been some estimation that instead of the 22,000, almost 23,000, it's likely a much larger number. I don't want to misspeak, so I don't want to put a number out there. With seasonal flu, even in a bad year, we're looking at a case fatality rate of about 0.5% or less. And so the significant differences between COVID-19 and influenza is that we don't have treatment and we don't have a vaccine. And so there's really not a way to prevent it or to treat it the way we could with seasonal influenza.
Okay, Supervisor Lanu and then Supervisor Quinn. So Supervisor Lanu, Tim?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Really the question that I have to ask is, there are guidelines for Douglas County and Shawano County But really, what is the compliance with those guidelines? Does it exist? Is mask wearing, 90+% at these events, or is it, 0? I just was recently sent some photographs from private party regarding the SEC races at Elkhart Lake on the eastern part of in Sheboygan County. And every photograph that I saw of people, not a one of them was wearing a mask. And so I'm a little concerned in regards to compliance. And I think, that really needs to be stressed if we're going to even make a concerted effort to get larger gatherings and survive it. Thank you.
Yeah. Supervisor Quinn, did you have something? You're muted, Tom. Oh, no.
I wasn't going to say anything, but I'll just a quick comment, I guess. For much of the time I've been on the county board, over 12 years, I served on the Health and Human Services Committee and was able to get a really deep appreciation for the professionalism and dedication of our staff. And so it is really a lot of weight that I personally have to give to KT's recommendations, and I'm leaning to accepting them at this point in time. I think it is, it's a difficult decision, but I think that her caution is well advised, and I respect that very much.
Thank you. Anybody else? Supervisor Larry Bjork.
Well, I guess first of all, I want to say I'm very proud of being part of the fact that I was on the committee that brought KT to her position. I think she's bright. I think she's informed. And most of all, I think she's extremely caring. But what we've got here, I think, is a situation of known risks. People don't have to come to the races. They can stay home. They don't have to be there. I think if you think about quality of life, I mean, I think the people that probably social demonstrated on Main and Broadway comedy a couple of weeks ago, stood shoulder to shoulder. They made the choice to be there. They came, they had their activity, and moved on. I think this racing association has given Dunn County page after page of things that they're going to do to see that their situation is races are safe to people.
Ether and then come here.
So I just wish that we wouldn't feel we have to run everybody's life, and that we would allow people to do things that enhance their quality of life. So I would support allowing the racing to start back up with oversight, as we've stated here and seen.
All right, I still see a number of hands, and I will be getting to you. Don Keither had his first, then Mike Kinnear, Vaughn Hedlund, and then Steve Jensen. So Don, go ahead.
Okay, I was surprised at what Chairman Bartlett said about the Douglas racetrack. They said because we got 600 beds in the area, we're okay. Boy, that's a pretty cavalier attitude, I think. This is a pretty serious disease and people are dying from it. I just think it's a bad idea to approve this resolution in the middle of a pandemic. Most states that opened up since Memorial Day are seeing a surge of cases. And will we see that here? I don't know. I think the main reason that we've been doing pretty well here in Dunn County is that we haven't had any large gatherings. For instance, the Ludington Guard Band, Music Over Menominee, Memorial Day, Freedom Fest has been canceled. Church services are virtual. We're even here virtual because we're afraid of the spreading the disease. And yet now we're thinking of voting that would allow 700-800 people to get together. I just don't understand that. I've been trying to rationalize this one way or the other. And my basic question is racing so essential to our community that we are willing to accept the many health risks involved? And I guess each one of us has to answer that. For me, I like to err on the side of caution. So I'm going to have to vote no for this. I can't, my conscience won't let me do anything else. Thank you.
Thank you. Mike Kinnear, Supervisor Kinnear.
Thank you. Don kind of laid out the same ideas I have. You know, tonight we're choosing on whether to approve this particular proposal. That doesn't mean that in the future that the Racing Association couldn't work with the Health Department for one that might be acceptable. But we're looking at this one. You know, it's a matter of balancing the wants of some people, the needs and the rights of people, personal and societal. You know, those are all valid points. But I can't support this proposal, and there's a few reasons. First off, KT laid out very well her viewpoint, and I think we need to listen to the professionals. Secondly, the number of people in this proposal is so large, 700 and some just in the stands. And then the size increases rather rapidly. After 2 weeks, it goes to 75%. It just gets so large so quickly. And if it would have to go back to a committee to see whether it's working or not, that'd be too late. There's also no way to ensure, someone else mentioned this too, that people follow health guidelines in this proposal. You know, the fact that the association worked very well with the committee is nice, but that's not really what we're looking at here. Is it going to work? You know, what finally pushed me though is I asked myself, what happens if I vote no here? And if I vote no, you know, racing fans and their families are going to miss out things that they've been doing as families and friends for a long time. And that's really important. KT talked about that a little bit too. There'd be some negative economic effects. And those are all important. And there's other arguments that are made too. But those are some of the consequences. If I vote yes, and this is accepted, I say, okay, what can happen? We put more people at risk. Statistically, more people are going to catch it, and somebody might die. You know, nobody come out and said somebody might die maybe tonight, but that's the way it is statistically. So it's not something that I even want to consider because of that. So I'll be voting no on this particular proposal, and search your conscience. Thank you.
Thank you. Supervisor Headland.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I echo the feelings and the discussions that have gone on to this point. Just one point I guess I'd like to bring up and remind our supervisors is we are not personally responsible for the health of the people in this county. We have a health department, we have doctors, we have physicians, we have moms and dads and grandpas and grandmas and teachers and so forth, all who are educated people who need to make their own decisions. Our Constitution guarantees that they can make their own decisions as long as they're not breaking the law. It's not the responsibility of Dunn County or Dunn County Board of Supervisors to change the constitutional outcomes of what people get to do. However, I think that we're laying out a risk with the numbers that we're talking about here that's probably just too great. And I think maybe something modified coming back from the Racing Association and maybe a little time to look at what some of these other tracks may or may not encounter would be a little more appropriate for this time. So I originally thought I was going to vote yes, but I think that it's a little too scary right now. I think I also will vote no.
All right, Supervisor McCullough.
Okay, unmuted there. Yeah, I'm going to be brief. We have very clear guidance from our Dunn County Health Department on this, that we shouldn't be having groups larger than 50. I cannot in good conscience vote to violate that recommendation. And I just want to note, we make a lot of decisions on this board. A lot of them are important. This one weighs heavier than a lot. Normally, if we make a big mistake, it's taxpayer dollars that are on the line. And that's not good. It's bad when we blow those mistakes. In this case, a mistake can be measured in hospitalizations, permanent respiratory disability, and funerals. Thank you.
Thank you. Supervisor Jensen, did you have your hand up before?
Yes, I did. I look at the retail businesses that have people in and out of them constantly with not wearing masks and handling all their products in the store. And I question whether that's any more dangerous than a racetrack. That's my comment.
Okay. Supervisor Rogers.
I think I come from the perspective that we have to be careful about not stepping on people's rights and freedoms. And I have a real hard time making other people's decision on what they have a right to do. I sent a letter to everyone. I'm sure you all read it. It was way long-winded. That's why I knew I couldn't say it all during the meeting. But if someone's doing if someone is stepping on or doing something that affects me, my health, then yes, we need to address that. I'm not sure that's the case when we talk about the racing or some of the other cases in general with opening up. People going to the races are making their own choice to go. They're choosing to be in that environment, and they accept the risk involved with that. And I understand the argument that they may go home and somebody at home may be compromised. Now, I'm very concerned about compromised individuals, as we all are. But that person going to the races and then going home to an elderly parent or something is using really poor judgment. And to think that they're not going to use that same poor judgment somewhere else isn't necessarily a reality either. So the people going to the races are making their choice, and I don't feel it's my right to dictate to them and take their freedoms and choices away from them. Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Supervisor Tripp.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Most of what I was going to say has already been said, but I think there are a couple of illogical assumptions that are sometimes being made in relation to this argument. One of them is that, well, there are lots of things going on that might help spread the virus. So if they're going on, why don't we have races? That just doesn't make sense. People I know complain about the big box stores and things like that. And it's true, and maybe they're essential and maybe they're not. But the fact that something else might be a problem does not in any way tell us that we should add to that problem. The other is one that if it were true that a race fan was put in a big pen right after the races and let out the following Friday night to go to the races next time and never went home and associated with their family members, who then, without any symptoms, go to work at the grocery store that I shop at, or take care of my mother-in-law at the neighbors. Or, you know, the problem with that argument of letting people make their own decisions is that they have, sometimes unconsciously and with no ill will whatsoever, an extremely negative effect on other people. Now, we don't like to admit that. We don't like to admit that anything we do is ever going to cause anybody else problems. But the fact is, in this case, you can't tell by looking whether the jogger that I'm walking past in the park or whether the grocery clerk that I'm buying groceries from has been exposed. Anything we do that tends to increase the potential for that exposure, we should try to avoid. We've got very clear guidance on this. This is something that we can avoid, and I know it's going to cause stress and all kinds of angst among race fans. And frankly, there are some practical economic consequences to this that are not going to be good. But the fact that these race fans make their own decision to go to the races, it doesn't stop there. If they never then went out among society, it would stop. But they don't. They're out there just like all the rest of us, and we've got no choice. When I walk into a grocery store because I have to buy groceries, when I go to the hardware store because I need something, when I simply go out for a walk, I have no choice about whether the person I encounter is going to be expose me to COVID virus. So then, since we have no choice in the matter, I think it's incumbent on us to do whatever we can. One of the previous speakers also mentioned something that took me back a little bit, said, we don't bear the responsibility for the health of the county. The hell we don't. We do too. We are responsible. We've got an opportunity here to do something that is going to limit the risk of people getting sick and potentially dying. And if we don't do it, that is our responsibility. No matter how we vote, it belongs to us. It comes with the job. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Any other speaking?
Mr. Chairman.
Supervisor Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, I've listened to all of you, and I think I'm proud of my fellow supervisors. I appreciate how concerned and how deep all of you are looking into it. And I, like you, have wrestled with this decision ever since I realized I had to face it. And so we want to do the right thing. And every one of you, when you are speaking, my fellow supervisors, and to Katie, it just makes my decision even worse, because what you said is brilliant. So how am I going to make my decision, which that is my responsibility? And I decided I would listen tonight, because I kind of had my mind made up, but I would listen to all of you first, and I've done that. And now I've decided for me, the right thing to do is now I will have to vote no. But thank you to all of you, and to the facilities committee, I will have to say, and usually Chairman Maves, I support everything that facilities committee or that any committee does, because you've studied it. And I commend your committee. You did a lot of work. You made a way to make the Dunn County Fair work. You've made a way to make other things work. And I really think that's awesome of your committee. We don't always get a full vote of support, but I want to commend you. And again, I'm saying, however this vote ends up, however it ends up, we are a county board that'll make this work. And I will finally say, yes, after listening to you, I changed my mind how I'm going to vote. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Supervisor Steen.
I call the question.
Is there any other discussion?
Mr. Chairman,
Supervisor Larry Bjork.
could we have a roll call vote on this, please?
If you're asking for a roll call vote, we can.
Yes, I am. Thank you.
All right. Are we ready to vote? If we are, we will have the clerk call the roll.
Supervisor Crumry.
Aye.
Say that again, please.
No.
Supervisor Keeter.
No. Oh, wait a minute.
Supervisor.
Did you hear me?
No. You said no, correct?
I said no, yeah.
Okay. Supervisor Lino? Supervisor Lino? You're muted, Supervisor Lino?
Yes.
Supervisor Maves?
Yes.
Supervisor McCullough?
No.
Supervisor Morehouse?
No.
Supervisor Niehoff?
Yes.
Supervisor Procto?
Yes.
Supervisor Quinn?
No.
Supervisor Rogers?
Yes.
That was yes, correct, Supervisor Rogers?
Yes.
Supervisor Score?
Correct.
Yes.
Supervisor Steen?
No.
Supervisor Story?
No.
Supervisor Tripp?
No.
Supervisor Vandermeulen?
No,
That was no, correct, Supervisor Vandermeulen?
that's correct. No.
Supervisor Vogel?
No.
Supervisor Zons?
No.
Supervisor Anderson?
No.
Supervisor Bauer?
Yes.
Supervisor Gary Bjork?
Yes.
Supervisor Larry Bjork?
Yes.
Supervisor Calabrese?
No.
Supervisor Hartung?
No.
Supervisor Headland?
No.
Supervisor Jensen?
Yes.
Supervisor Johnson?
Yes.
Supervisor Kennedy?
No.
Supervisor Kinnear?
No.
Chairman Bartlett?
The resolution fails. Excuse me, the resolution fails. 11 to 18. All right, moving on to 9D. Committee on Administration, a resolution approving amendment to employee handbook regarding safety and clothing allowance policy. I need a motion for this. Supervisor Headland.
I would so move.
Second.
And Supervisor
second.
McCullough seconds. Speaking to the resolution.
I would gladly do it, Mr. Chair. This is Supervisor Hudlin. If you could look at this in your packet, if you have not, it's a resolution that is changing the handbook to cover the cost of lost, damaged tools by the staff that work in the maintenance department, mostly in the highway department. These employees are required to provide their own tools, their own toolbox, their own supply of tools, which in most cases are in the thousands of dollars worth of tools. So back as far as 2017, the facilities manager had requested that we replace any lost tools to these employees or damaged tools so that they would not come out of their own pocketbook. Unfortunately, nothing got done about this up until now. And it came before the administrative committee, and we felt that it was a thing to do. It was something that we needed to do to go back to 2017 when we agreed to put money into the budget for it, but never agreed to changing the handbook, so it got done.
Any other questions or speaking? I think Highway Commissioner Swirsky is on also if we have questions, or he was going to be. Any questions? Supervisor Rogers? Supervisor Rogers, do you have a question? Your hand is up.
Is this for lost tools or is this for wear and tear on tools?
I think it's for both.
It is simply a payment to help offset the cost of the tools, replacing tools, maintaining tools, since they are owned by the individuals who are using them on our behalf. It is a very, also a very common practice.
Supervisor McCullough.
I'll note that the highway department, at the highway committee meetings, we've been discussing this for some years too, and strongly approve of the motion in general. At least we have it at the previous meetings where we've discussed it.
Thank you. Any other discussion? I don't see any other hands raised. If I'm missing somebody, holler out. All right, all in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. Motion carried. At this time, it is time for announcements, and County Manager, Mr. Miller has one announcement.
Just a repeat of something I mentioned earlier. July's county board meeting will be the final Wednesday, July 29, not our standard third Wednesday. Please make note of that. Thank you. Oh, by the way, I'm sorry, I was just reminded by Corporation Council. Executive Committee will be the week before, so it also will not be happening on its standard time. Executive will be on the 22nd and County Board on the 29th of July.
Is that a Zoom meeting?
At this point, we haven't decided yet. I would hope that we could maybe move to having meetings in our county boardroom again. I know other counties are, but we'll have to see what happens between now and then. Any other announcements? Supervisor Bjork, Larry Bjork.
Thank you. I just want to remind everybody that June is Dairy Month. Dairy products are very important to our health, very important to the economy of Dunn County. And if anyone wishes to see cows and calves frolicking in the pasture, they can come by my farm off of 430th Avenue down to Spring Brook, and they can sit in their car and they look at cows and calves being cows and calves. And June is Dairy Month. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Any other announcements?
I just want-
Supervisor Kennedy.
You're muted, Supervisor Kennedy.
That there's a special code to look for to make sure that milk comes from Dunn County. I mean, from the state of Wisconsin. I think it was 50 or 55.
All right, I didn't know that. So if you come on the exact number and where to find that, I'd be interested. Thank you. Anybody else? If not, we're adjourned. Thank you for all attending. Thank you for putting up with us with being muted and trying to speak and not being muted. And thank you very much. Good night.
Night.